This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
France admits it owns missiles found at a base of Libyan warlord. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres in Mozambique to assess humanitarian situation after Cyclone Idai. And leaders calls for unified efforts against terrorism. Hello everyone, welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program, South African President Ramaphosa renews Reserve Bank Governor's 5-year term. And in your sport, West African giants Senegal and Nigeria progress into the Africa Cup of Nations semi-final. We begin the broadcast in Libya, where the conflict in the capital Tripoli has shown no sign of slowing down. 4 French anti-tank missiles have been found at a base loyal to Libya's eastern commander Khalifa Haftar. France denies breaching the arms embargo and says the unusable missiles were never intended to be sold or transferred to any party involved in the Libyan conflict. The US-made Javelin missiles were discovered after anti-Haftar forces overran a camp in the town of Gerian, south of the capital Tripoli. Haftar's forces have been attempting to overthrow the unity government in Tripoli since the beginning of April. Well, let's broaden this discussion, and joining me to discuss the situation in Libya is Dr. Ziad Akal. He's a political analyst and researcher at the Ahram Center for Strategic Studies. He's joining me from Cairo. Dr. Ziad Akal, thank you for joining us on Africa Live. Now, these developments certainly do raise fresh questions about France's role in the conflict in Libya. Is France an honest broker at this point?
Well, it's always nice to be here, of course. Hello. And, France's role in Libya has been one of the cards that France has been playing in its regional influence ever since the Macron administration came to power. Its role in Libya has been much greater than before, and its will to continue its influence in North Africa is starting to see Libya as a main portal or entry gate for this role to materialize or develop. France is so much entwined or intertwined with its interests, and these interests that France has at the moment, Khalifa Haftar is trying to provide the most security for the French interests in exchange for French support, whether political or recently militarily. So France has become one of the main actors playing a part in Libya. This, of course, will create some sort of a new conflict within the international actors, mainly France, Italy, Egypt, the UAE, Turkey and Algeria.
Well, but we do understand that there is an arms embargo in place, but despite that arms embargo, why is Libya still awash with foreign weaponry?
Mainly because there is absolutely no consensus within the international community over what should happen in Libya or how should the conflict end. So there is a lot of foreign weaponry, first of all because Libya, specifically since 2011, I mean, if we remember in 2011, France shipped something like 8 tons of weapons to Libya. So basically, there are different interests in the Libyan context, and international forces, international actors fear that there is absolutely no sort of apparatus or tool to bring political settlement in the Libyan inside. Therefore, it is trying as much as it can to be present there with their foreign sort of military intervention through the provision of weapons. And at the same time, there are a lot of interests because Libya had, since 2011, a lot of billions of dollars in its foreign deposit. So it had money, and there's a very powerful lobby, specifically within the West, Europe, and the US, that sells arms. And that's why the Libyan scene at the moment has been extended for the past 8 years, because there are networks of interests to actually bring weapons into Libya that are not used according to any political agreement or settlement or legitimacy. They are actually used in militia fights and in terrorist attacks.
Let's look at those interests for the moment, Dr. Ziad, because the war seems to have also drawn in a range of regional and international actors. Are we seeing the conflict now opening up into some sort of international proxy war with Haftar and his backers on the one side, and on the other, the GNA and its backers?
Well, definitely there is a process of rebuilding alliances in Libya, in the Libyan inside and in the context outside of Libya, either regionally, if we are talking about Egypt, Emirates, and Algeria, or internationally, if we are talking about France, Italy, Russia, and the US. There is a process of maybe supporting the local allies in the Libyan inside with different tools. So it is of course very, very close to the scene of a proxy war. But the idea is not actually a state of war, but it is a state of recreating the alliances, recreating new actors, and recreating new mechanisms.
Right.
Eventually, the two opposing arguments still exist between military finalization of this conflict or political settlement, and all over the actors interested in Libya that now are having the roles being changed. This argument still remains, which means that it is a sign that the Libyan conflict will continue for some time, and that the UN plan of political settlement will not necessarily be practical or activated within the coming time.
Dr. Ziad Akil joining us there from Cairo. Thank you very much for your insights on the Libyan scenario. And we'll be staying in Libya for the moment, and the United Nations has welcomed a move by authorities to release illegal migrants held in detention centers. The UN had expressed concern after an anonymous airstrike hit the Tajura center last week, killing more than 50 people and injuring 130 more. Here's Adil Mahrouri with more from Cairo.
UNHCR has confirmed that the Libyan Interior Ministry has released hundreds of illegal migrants on Tuesday. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees was concerned about their safety after last week's airstrike on Tajura detention center near east of the capital, Tripoli. Fighting around Tripoli has intensified since April after Eastern General Khalifa Haftar moved to seize the Libyan capital. Last week, an anonymous airstrike hit the detention center, killing and injuring more than 180 migrants held there. The internationally recognized government of National Accord accused the rival Eastern-based LNA forces of carrying out the attack. Haftar's forces responded by counter-accusing the Western government. Earlier, the United Nations agency says around 260 African migrants have been relocated to another detention center in the Libyan capital following the strike. UNHCR will provide assistance to the migrants through its domestic urban programs. The deadly airstrikes highlighted the hardships faced by thousands of migrants detained in facilities near the front lines of the fighting between Libya's rival militias. The UN has voiced its concern about the war over Tripoli. Migrants have been the most vulnerable. The World Health Organization says that so far, around 1,000 have been killed because of these military campaigns. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is due in Mozambique to assess the humanitarian situation and damage after storms wrecked parts of the country. The UN chief has been urging the international community to show solidarity with Mozambique. Antonio Guterres will meet Mozambican President Filipe Nyusi before visiting the affected areas. Cyclone Idai and Cyclone Kenneth struck the country earlier this year, causing widespread destruction. Around 3.8 million people were affected and hundreds others were killed. Among the hardest hit areas were Beira and northern Cabo Delgado province. Since then, Mozambique has been appealing for aid to help rebuild the country. Last month, it hosted a donors conference which raised $1.2 billion, far short of the $3.2 billion required. Well, joining me now in studio is CGTN's Daniel Arap Moi, who was in Mozambique soon after the devastating cyclone Idai. Daniel, you reported extensively on the impact of the cyclones both in Mozambique and in Malawi. Give us a brief insight into what you saw. Give us a sense of the situation then and the concerns of the people.
Well, thank you very much. Well, Cyclone Idai and Kenneth struck these two different countries, actually three countries, at a very unexpected time of the year, of the month. And majority of the people never knew that this was coming. So it was very unexpected. And you can imagine if a disaster struck today without us being prepared, what it would cause to us. So majority of the people were hit unexpectedly. And the devastation was actually so huge that many of the people that were affected were caught unawares, they were not prepared whatsoever. Even the governments themselves were not prepared.
Give us a sense of that devastation, though, because we do understand that cities were, underwater, cities were flooded. And what exactly happened to the people? Give us a sense of that devastation. Well,
majority of the people that we came into contact with lost their homes, lost their gardens. Food security became a problem. Totally. There is one particular woman that I still see every day that I picture what happened in Pemba. This is a woman that we went to and we found her with her daughter trying to rebuild their house. They told us that everything that they owned went with the waters. And I just looked at this woman, struggling with her daughter, seeking for assistance, which is not coming. Yes, you did ask me a question of what are the survivors saying. Majority of these people that we spoke to lost everything, and they expected their governments to come right away to help them in that situation. But aid was not forthcoming, assistance was not forthcoming, because remember, nobody was prepared for this. So even the monies that they expected, the rebuilding process that they expected that would occur very fast was not coming because resources were not available. It had to be mobilized fast.
So this was such an unexpected scenario. In your assessment, though, what are some of the urgent needs of the people there? And is the visit by the UN chief likely to mobilize more funding? Because so far, Mozambique, for instance, has only mobilized 1.2 billion.
And exactly, that is the biggest problem that these people are facing. Infrastructure is one of the key areas that need to be built right now, because many of the roads were destroyed by the flood waters. Communication became a problem as well. Lines were down, swept away by the flood waters. And of course, food security is one of the key areas that may need to be addressed, because people's gardens were washed away and majority of the people remain without anything to eat. So they depended on well-wishers, donor community to bring in funds and bring them food as well. So those are some of the areas. Health facilities need to be rebuilt as well, because hospitals were washed away by the waters. The schools, for example, were also washed away by the waters. So I really think that it was wise for the Secretary General to visit himself, because it's one thing being in New York and papers are tabled before you every day, and it's another thing to go on the ground to assess it for yourself. So next time when people come, you know exactly how the picture is, what the people need, and how they should be assisted. So I really think that this is going to go a long way in mobilizing resources to help the people that are affected in these areas.
Daniel Arap Moi, thank you very much for your update there. He has been following the situation in Mozambique and Malawi following the devastation of Cyclone Idai and Cyclone Kenneth. Well, before his trip to Maputo, Guterres was in Nairobi for a high-level terrorism conference. Guterres called for more financial support for Africa's counter-terror plan. CGTN's Robert Nagila reports.
From the Sahel region, where Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Niger and Mauritania are coordinating a security response to a jihadist threat. To West Africa, where Nigeria and Cameroon are battling the Islamic State-affiliated group Boko Haram. To East Africa, where Al-Shabaab continues to pose a significant threat to the region. There appears to be no end in sight to the terror threats facing the continent. Now, a two-day counterterrorism conference in Nairobi, hosted by the United Nations, aims to reverse the trend.
I deeply believe that African peace-enforcing and counterterrorism operations must have strong and clear mandates by the UN Security Council, backed by sufficient, predictable and sustainable financial support, namely through assessed contributions.
Kenya's president, whose country has borne the brunt of some of the deadliest terror attacks in recent years, is urging the adoption of a multifaceted approach in fighting terror.
Discussions and solutions should propose multifaceted approaches to combating terrorism, extremism, and radicalization that confronts the vice on the battlefield, in places of worship, in marketplaces, in our schools, as well as our homes.
The African Union, meanwhile, has called on member states to deal with the root causes of radicalization as they address security threats.
This is no ordinary enemy. Countries are now forced to address competing priorities between development and security.
Translating this perception of fear into collective punishment of African youth through discriminatory policies is not the solution, and can even add to their grievances and further radicalize disaffected youth.
The next few hours will be crucial in formulating a new strategy on how Africa combats terrorism from its root causes to the threat it poses. Wabot Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's get more on this now, and I'm joined by Mwenda Mbijiwe. He's the CEO of Eye on Security. Mwenda, thank you for joining us on AfricaLive. The Sahel region, North African region, Horn of Africa, East African region, all having been affected by terrorism at some stage. How can the international community, though, support member states in Africa to be resilient against terrorism?
Thank you. The problem of terrorism is in Africa is rather a new phenomenon. As much as Africa has its own problems, from prehistoric problems, but now terrorism has become like a modern day problem about which most countries were never prepared. And to some of the countries, like in the Sahel, Mali, Burkina Faso, this came like a storm from the ocean. It's like a tornado, and you don't even know what to do. You're trying here, they are fighting on the north, they are fighting on the east. Nigeria, one of the most populous nations with the largest military in Africa, cannot deal with Boko Haram. They take over 200 girls and they are lost forever. So African nations need help, and they need benchmarking. They need help from nations that have gone through terror experiences in the past. Talk about European nations, United States of America, countries like China that have contained terrorism for the longest. I've never heard of a terrorist attack in China.
When you look at what African leadership is talking about, though, they're now talking about trying to find homegrown solutions to deal with this terrorism problem. Is the African leadership, though, prepared to come up with African solutions to this sort of unique African problem regarding terrorism?
I'll cite the case of Kenya. When terrorism came to Kenya, we were still practicing security the colonial way, where you contain the information, you keep it top secret, nobody knows nothing, you say nothing, there's an attack and there's no information given, no numbers of people dead given. And from 2011 coming up this way, our leaders have had to wake up to the reality that, hey, we can't hide this problem. It is here, terrorism is here, we got to involve the country. And so they opened up the space. See, the last attack we had in Nairobi, the Dusit Hotel attack, the Inspector General of Police was there on point every few hours, updating the media and the nation what was going on. So African leaders are quickly adopting, and I will tell them, even the speed at which they're adopting is still slow. They need to adopt faster so they can measure up to the attack levels and then overtake the attackers and be ahead of them, so that we are not reactive, we are proactive.
You're talking about Kenya. Let's stay with the Kenyan situation for the moment. Kenya has come up with a mechanism and has established an anti-terrorism county action plan to try and reduce the threats of terrorism in the country. How's that working?
Well, even as the conference going on, as insisted, or rather as focused, it's about community involvement in terrorism. And one of the targets of this conference is targeting the youth, the efforts of the youth in combating terrorism. But I also found out a very unique model that is being run by some NGO, where they are targeting the elders of the communities, and they're calling it Fahamika, where it is wazee wa busara, that is elders with wisdom. And so they're using elders to fight extremism and radicalization. So this whole conference and the whole effort in the country right now in Kenya, the county action plan, is to bring the communities to participate in keeping their country safe. It's no longer a preserve of the uniformed security agencies or the intelligence community. It's an effort for all of us as a country, no matter what you do, whether in the media, you are in business, you are in schools or whatever. Now there's even a bill, you saw it in the papers yesterday, that they want to pass a law in parliament that will allow school kids to be taught about issues terrorism and how to counter terrorism. So this is county action plan. All right,
Mwenda Mbijiwe, thank you very much for that insight into terrorism in Africa. We're now going to take a short break, but coming up on the program, Uganda's cabinet backs a move to ratify new River Nile agreement. And on World Population Day, how is Africa dealing with the challenge of population growth?
Data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed.
And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. AfricaLive. Find your voice.
A new UN report estimates the world's population will reach 9.7 billion by 2050, up 2 billion from today. The report says half of the world's population will be concentrated in just 9 countries, one of which is the Democratic Republic of Congo. The growth forecast comes amid a humanitarian crisis and an Ebola outbreak in the DRC. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has that report from Kinshasa.
Bankita Iyeni and his wife are parents of 10 children. They live on the outskirts of Kinshasa with their grandchildren. Extended families are a common feature in the DRC capital, given the high costs of living. But the couple is finding it difficult to provide basic needs for their large family.
Some of my children left their little kids with us. We struggle to take care of them because we don't have a steady income.
I have no job, nothing at all. Our grandchildren need to go to school, but we can't afford to pay their fees.
This family is among many in the DRC that struggle to make ends meet. According to the latest UN estimates, the DRC has a population of 86 million people. That figure is expected to increase significantly over the next 3 decades. The UN has listed the DRC among 9 nations where half of the world's population growth will be concentrated by 2050. A Congolese consultant says the country's large population wouldn't be a problem if it were matched with projects that boost the economy.
Congo really doesn't have really a grave strategic concern with regard to demographic growth. On the contrary, it is an asset, and Congo has got sufficient land, sufficient water, and capacity to produce resources to deal with that. And on the contrary, Congo does have surplus to attract, to help Africa. The only problem right now is that the new president, so far, in terms of strategic planning, has not yet pronounced the idea of his game-changing projects.
President Felix Tshisekedi announced a $304 million program during his first 100 days, targeting key sectors that would spur economic growth. But it remains to be seen whether it will transform the country with its rapidly growing population. The UN has urged the DRC and other countries with high fertility levels to find solutions to their growing populations. The DRC's population growth forecast comes weeks after the World Food Programme described the country as the second largest hunger crisis in the world after Yemen. That, coupled with the unrest in the northeast and an Ebola outbreak, presents yet another problem that the country will have to deal with. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Well, Nigeria is another country whose population is expected to double in the next few years, with a growth of more than 3% a year. Let's cross over to Chika Tudor. He's an expert in African affairs. Chika, the UN is urging countries like the DRC and Nigeria to find solutions to their growing populations. Does Nigeria have a blueprint on how to deal with the rapid population growth?
Well, the reality is that we should be concerned about population growth. There's no doubt about that, especially when the population growth outstrips economic growth. But the reality is that that is not the kind of or the kind of advice we expect from the United Nations at this particular point in time. What I would expect the United Nations to be advising Nigeria and the DRC is to find solutions to the myriads of socioeconomic problems that have, made it impossible for these countries to reach their capabilities in terms of the natural resources and the human resources that are available to them. Why have they not been able to go beyond where they are today? And so that has to do, you cannot define population outside of the resources, the natural resources and the human resources of countries, because population itself could be a major advantage. It is not for nothing that countries like China today, of course, the most populated country, in the world, but yet China is said to be a world power, economic power, very, very soon in spite of the population. So in as much as you acknowledge the problem with population, that we need to do something to curtail it to some extent. But the reality is that if we use the resources of these countries, as they should be used, if we show capability in using all of these resources, then there is no doubt that today we will not be sitting down, we will not be sitting down, today to talk about the problem of population growth in Nigeria or in the DRC.
Let's stick to one point you've mentioned there, that there could be a problem if the population growth outstrips economic growth. What is the economic impact on Nigeria's economy?
Oh yeah, because we have not been able to, harness our economic resources. The country is richly endowed, and I think it is a coincidence that the two of the nations that the United Nations has singled out, for this advice are two of the richest countries, potentially richest countries, with both human and natural resources in the continent. And so obviously, because we have had a political leadership that has not been conscious of its responsibilities and has not been able to carry out its duties to its people. So we have, the very heavy burden of a burgeoning population that, is supported by very little economic growth, and so the lives of the people have been impacted heavily. We do not have jobs, with factories are not working. We have problem in the energy sector. In virtually every segment of the national lives of the citizens of this country, there are all sorts of problems, and simply because the burden of not having visionary leaders who are committed to the country and who will use the resources of the country, both natural and human, for the good of the country. This has impaired negatively on the people and has created unnecessary burden on the people, and this has security implications. some of the
right.
Insurgency activities and the violence that we have in all parts of the country are motivated by economic factors.
Chika Tudor joining us there from Lagos. Thank you for that update. Now, Uganda's cabinet has backed a move to ratify the new River Nile Agreement, also known as the Cooperative Framework Agreement. According to the government, the new agreement will allow partner states to use the Nile River fairly. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reports from Kampala.
Uganda has agreed to sign the Cooperative Framework Agreement formulated in 2010. It sets out rights and obligations on the development and management on the River Nile's resources. The agreement replaces the 1920 colonial treaty which gave Egypt and Sudan more powers over the Nile's waters.
Riparian countries decided that we should review this 1920 agreement so it can be in tandem with the national needs and demands of each of the countries. And so that's how they came up with the Cooperative Framework Agreement.
This move has not gone down well with Egypt and Sudan. Other countries who share the Nile River want more say so that they can use the natural resource to develop their economies.
And now that we have already had Tanzania, we have had Rwanda, we have had Ethiopia, Uganda shall be the fourth. If tomorrow we get South Sudan or DRC, we are home and dry, right? And that will mean that, most importantly, we shall all be able to use these waters together, equitably. Uganda, we need water for irrigation.
The Nile is the longest river in the world. Over 400 million people depend on it for survival. And as more countries put pen to paper, they hope for calmer waters ahead. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's coming up. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa renews Reserve Bank Governor's 5-year term. And the U.S. Federal Reserve's Chairman Jerome Powell hints of interest rate cuts announcement later in July.
AfricaLive. Find your voice.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has reappointed Leseja Kganyago as the governor of the South African Reserve Bank. Kganyago will serve another 5 years, effective from November the 9th, 2019. The South African rand firmed up in early trading against the dollar as the appointment signaled continuity. President Ramaphosa also appointed Fundi Shazibana and Rashad Kassim as the Deputy Central Bank Governors for 5 years each, effective the 1st of August. The new appointments come at a time when the bank is expected to cut interest rates by 0.25% next week. Economists in the country assigned a median 60% probability rates that would be cut on July the 18th, even though inflation is expected to average 4.5% this year, which is the center of the bank's 3% to 6% target range. Now, in many African countries, trading across borders often involves going through a third currency. If you're buying oil from Nigeria, an air ticket to West, North or South Africa, most likely you'll have to pay in US dollars. The Afrexim Bank estimates that this ends up costing the continent $5 billion a year. To solve it, some countries are trying to switch to a common currency like the ECO in ECOWAS. In others, common payment systems are being established. But are crypto systems like Facebook's Libra an alternative? CGTN's Ramanyang put that question to the president of the African Development Bank.
Well, the thing is that we got to make sure digital payments you were talking about. I mean, take a look at what has happened in digital payments world today. It didn't actually come from the West. It actually came out of Africa. It came right out of your country, actually, with the M-Pesa that was done. And so for us as African Development Bank, we are investing more in digital payment systems. Digital payment systems are going to fast-track transactions within the continental free trade areas, no doubt about it. It's also going to be very critical as you look at financial inclusion, especially for women. It's going to help tremendously also in terms of security, personal security. Most of the trade that's actually going to be done or being done, and more is going to be done off in the years coming, is actually in the informal sector. And so the more people carry cash, and people get mugged and so on, and taken advantage of. So digital payments are going to reduce their transaction costs and obviously give them also quite a lot of security when they have to actually trade across borders. And in particular, it's going to be very critical to moving the informal trade more to the formal trade as well.
The U.S. Federal Reserve's chairman, Jerome Powell, has warned the U.S. Congress on what he describes as uncertainties facing the United States economy. Mr. Powell's testimony boosted the chances of a rate cut at the Fed's July 31st meeting. CGTN's Giles Gibson explains from Washington, D.C.
In the financial services industry, as long as
when the Fed chairman speaks, global markets hang on his every word. The S&P 500 briefly broke through the 3,000 mark for the first time ever, as Jerome Powell signaled a tactical shift.
At our June meeting, we indicated that, in light of increased uncertainties about the economic outlook and muted inflation pressures, we would closely monitor the implications of incoming information for the economic outlook and would act as appropriate to sustain the expansion. Since then, based on incoming data and other developments, it appears that uncertainties around trade tensions and concerns about the strength of the global economy continue to weigh on the U.S. economic outlook.
Those uncertainties mean business investment has flattened off. Throw in weak inflation on top of that, and Wall Street now believes a rates cut in July is a certainty. Breaking with tradition, US President Donald Trump has been piling on the pressure in recent weeks for the Fed to do exactly that.
If we had a Fed that would lower interest rates, it would be like a rocket ship.
But many economists believe the Fed and its chairman are completely immune to outside pressure.
I know that people parse his words and try to say, well, they are or they aren't going to cut rates, or they're more likely or less likely, but the rate thing is really just a distraction from what's going on. And the truth is, if they believe that the economy is too weak, then they have to do something. If they believe that inflation is too much of a risk, then they have to do something. And it really just comes down to that.
Jerome Powell also told Congress
my answer would be no.
That he wouldn't quit if President Trump asked him to step aside, adding the law gives him a 4-year term, and Powell says he intends to serve it. But economic headwinds could push the US central bank to give the president exactly what he wants. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Washington.
German auto manufacturer Volkswagen has launched the final edition of its iconic Beetle automobile. The car was unveiled from its Mexican factory this week at a ceremony accompanied by a mariachi band. The bag-shaped sedan rolled off the production line as the last iteration of a model first manufactured in the late 1930s. The limited edition of 65 units will be sold in Mexico at a base price of $21,000 with a reservation payment of $1,000. The production of the final Beetle model was announced in September by the firm following the Dieselgate scandal. Volkswagen paid out huge government settlements after rigging 11 million cars to cheat regulatory emissions tests.
This day for us is a little sad. We are very proud to have this car here. It was the first car that our parents and grandparents owned. The thousands of taxis that served us for decades. This is why for Mexicans and for the world, this car means mobility. Mobility made in Mexico, made in Puebla.
The one I like the most is the RCI. That car is fantastic from my perspective. The truth is, it's a car, very strong in my opinion, which has a very sporty motorization. The seats are made of leather. Few units were made. It had a 3.2 engine, VR6, very powerful.
I was the first initiator of the new Beetle worldwide in this plant in Puebla. 22 years ago I started production on July 7th, 1997, a car that was for everyone. We made 650 cars a day with a team of Mexicans, dedicated with a lot of courage and a lot of heart. Now that I see my baby coming out of the production line, it gives me a lot of emotion. It gives me a lot of pleasure because I want people to believe in the quality of the work of Mexicans.
Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire have agreed to legislate the minimum producer price to be paid to its cocoa farmers. The latest move aims to address the high income disparity in the cocoa value chain, as well as safeguard the industry's future. However, cocoa farmers in Ghana say these new measures will scare off international buyers. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai explains.
Samuel Komlon owns this 4-acre cocoa farm in the eastern region of Ghana. It's been passed on from one generation to the other. Yet, Komlon says, like his late father, he is not raking in much revenue from the sale of the cocoa.
The price is not up to our expectation. So, if you say you buy all the insecticide and all the weedicides and all those things that you need, and the labor too is very costly. So, the little that you get is put into the labor cost. The remainder is very meager.
For many years, buyers of the cash crop have been the ones determining the price. Globally, the chocolate market is worth around $100 billion, of which only $6 billion go to cocoa producers, a situation cocoa farmers like Komlon say has left them impoverished for years.
With 65% of global cocoa production between them, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire want to determine its price on the international market. They say this would help farmers bring home a reliable income for their families.
Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire have now pegged the price of cocoa at $2,600 per ton, an increase of $400 on the current price. They have also suspended the sale of cocoa on the international market until the implementation of the new price in the 2020-2021 season.
What we consider the floor price is $2,600. What was agreed, or what we understood to be the system of trading going forward, is to have what we refer to as the living income differential. The living income differential is $400, which we place on every ton of cocoa.
But Komlon is concerned the price increase will kill off Ghana's cocoa trade, that buyers will refuse the price increase and look elsewhere instead. For now though, his happy cocoa producers are at least trying their bargaining skills after many years of being at the far end of the negotiating table. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Womenomics Africa is getting females around the table to open up about the hurdles they face in the business world. Dozens of women attended its 2019 masterclass in Johannesburg. It comes as the continent signed a historic pact opening up trade among African countries. CGTN's Julie Shire has more.
The historic African Free Trade Pact was launched this week, creating the world's biggest economic bloc. Women who have long been sidelined also want a piece of the pie. South African business movement Womenomics Africa is helping them to do so.
Womenomics of Africa is really taking a conversation about economics and making sure that women are at the heart. So when we start talking about this whole notion of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and we start talking about the growth in GDP, the growth in revenue and in sales and in trade, we can actually sit back and say we can attribute this value to women.
Women account for more than half of the population, but men still dominate proceedings in government, in the boardroom and in trade.
It is crucial for us to galvanize our strength and energies and be broadened in the opportunities that we can explore. It is okay for us to have our businesses in the hospitality industry and tourism, but it is equally important for us to be able to be included in the value chain.
It's about creating education and providing information to women to ensure that we're able to bring them into the space. How do you get them to understand which markets, what sectors, where the access actually lies, who do they need to speak to? That's why such events are so important.
Women are now gearing up to capitalize on trade opportunities. Intra-African trade stands at just 17%.
So across all the sectors, from agriculture to mining to oil and gas
to services, to the financial sector. The opportunities are immense for women to participate. And I think, unfortunately, until most recently, we have left women at the periphery. And that's beginning to change. And I think the more and more women are involved, the better it's going to get.
Womenomics is taking its conversations on the road. It will soon be traveling to Namibia, Ghana, and other parts of the continent, helping businesswomen connect and grow. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And your sports news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. West African giants Senegal and Nigeria progress to the Africa Cup of Nations semi-final.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.
AfricaLive. Find your voice.
Well, let's start your sport in Egypt, where Senegal is in the semi-final after a 1-0 win over Benin on Wednesday. The Teranga Lions went ahead in the 69th minute after a superb display that saw Sadio Mane assist Everton's Idrissa Gueye, who fired in his 4th goal of the tournament. Liverpool forward and Senegal captain Sadio Mane saw 2 of his goals disallowed by VAR. Benin's hope for a comeback was dashed after Olivier Verdon was handed a red card for a foul on Gueye. Aliou Cissé's side will meet either Madagascar or Tunisia in the last 4 as they try to win the competition for the first time. Well, Nigeria Super Eagles has secured a semi-final berth in the Africa Cup of Nations semi-finals after tossing out South Africa in the quarter-final. In a rare move, Egyptian fans threw their support behind the Nigerians after Bafana had knocked out the hosts from the tournament. CGTN's Adel Mahroui watched this from the sidelines.
Samuel Chukwueze snatched a goal 27 minutes into the game to temporarily break the deadlock. It wasn't until the 73rd minute that South Africa managed to get the equalizer. The game appeared to be heading to extra time, but William Troost Ekong's goal deep into the regulation time sealed the victory for Nigeria.
We looked very dangerous on the wings, especially with Musa and Chukwueze. I think that's our power. When we get space for the players to run into, we look dangerous because we're so fast. And so I think we were confident that we could score again. We didn't want to go too far in extra time because we were going to be too tired.
South Africa dominated early possession, but Nigerians were the better side with more chances in the match.
The quarterfinals was the first stage without the host Egypt. Still, one of the match's 2 teams still felt at home.
But it was Egyptian fans who had the last laugh. Nigeria was their team of choice. They were here for retribution against South Africa, the team that knocked the Pharaohs out of the tournament they are hosting.
I want to thank them. They really did a good job today. We're happy that they support us. I want them to come and support us in the next game. Yeah, we feel at home. You can see the stadium, Egyptians and Nigeria, they are very happy. So I'm very happy about that. Forza Egyptians!
Rising from the 3rd of its group to the 2nd quarter-final appearance in 17 years, South Africa had a good run, but were just unlucky. They played 4 of their last 5 matches against some of Africa's best heavyweights.
I'm not happy with a few things that happened in our preparation, and I'm not happy with a few things that reflected in our performances. I think we were just about at our best against Egypt, and we had to be. We were pretty good tonight and pretty good against Morocco, but we weren't ready for Ivory Coast because the preparations were too short.
With its 2-1 victory, Nigeria will clash against the winner between Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal for a place in the final. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And joining Nigeria and Senegal in their semi-finals will be the winners of the 2 remaining quarter-final matches due on Thursday at the Africa Cup of Nations. Madagascar will play Tunisia while Algeria face Cote d'Ivoire. CGTN Sadiq Shaban looks ahead at the first match of the day.
This will be an interesting pair to watch as the quarter-final business concludes here at the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations. Both Cote d'Ivoire and Algeria did not move past the group stage in the last tournament 2 years ago in Gabon, and neither of them qualified for the 2018 FIFA World Cup in Russia. Algeria are making their 3rd quarterfinals in 15 years, and they will be seeking to make all the way to the semi-finals for the first time in 29 years.
This is a motivation for me. I will be very happy, and God willing we will win this match. Cote d'Ivoire have a good team with experience, so hopefully we will concentrate and win this match so that we can go to the semi-final and add another win in the semi-final and hopefully win the final and the title.
The last time they were here, Cote d'Ivoire were runners-up in the 2006 tournament. The 2-time champions and the 2015 winners will be seeking a rediscovery of form as they seek to qualify for the semi-final.
Algeria, when you look at statistics, they are clearly the favorites, because when you play a competition without losing a match, without conceding a goal, and scoring 9 goals, it means they are a great team. Defensively, they are strong. In the midfield, they have good players. In attack, they go fast.
The Algeria versus Cote d'Ivoire match will be the last action from Suez as the action returns now to the main capital city, Cairo, for the remainder of the tournament. Sadiq Shaban, CGTN, from Suez Stadium in Egypt.
Let's get more insight on the ongoing quarterfinals in Egypt. Sadiq is joining me now from the coastal city of Suez. Sadiq, let's start with Senegal and Nigeria. How significant were their victories in the quarterfinals?
Those victories, Beatrice, you mentioned, were monumental for both sides. As you know, they are members of the so-called big boys who are in the 2018 FIFA World Cup in Russia. Senegal making the semi-finals for the first time since 2006, 13 years ago, which coincidentally was the time that Egypt last hosted this tournament here. For Nigeria, making it to the semi-final is a vindication of their resurgence, having missed the 2015 edition and the 2013 edition. Of course, we all remember that they also did not qualify for 2012, but they returned emphatically and won the 2013 edition in South Africa. So the African top teams, as it were, the top-seeded teams, at least had 2 members straight making it to the semi-finals late on Wednesday night.
Sadiq, and the other quarterfinals continue today. Is Madagascar's fairy tale likely to continue when they meet Tunisia?
Certainly, Beatrice, Madagascar say they have nothing to lose and they do not fear anyone at this point in time. It's their first ever qualification to the Africa Cup of Nations, and look what they have done. They say they have gotten into uncharted waters, they have written their own history, and at this point they have nothing to prove to anyone other than themselves. And having claimed the scalp of Nigeria during these qualifiers, they say Tunisia is just one of the teams that they have to. So the onus is on the Carthage Eagles of Tunisia to avoid another high-profile defeat in the hands of the Bulls from the Indian Ocean.
So 2 other continental giants, Cote d'Ivoire and Algeria, are due to meet. Who is likely to proceed to the next round?
These teams are both evenly matched, because if you look at what they're up to this time, both of them coming into this tournament, nursing disappointment, having not qualified, for the FIFA World Cup last year, and having a tremendous opportunity to show that they really are not a write-off, as it were. Algeria painfully looking to make the semi-finals for the first time since 1990, while Cote d'Ivoire, of course, they won the tournament in 2015. A lot of that has happened since then. A lot of their players who won that title are not here with them, but they say, look, we are the elephants, we're the winners from 2015. This is our moment to push through and trample on the desert, on our opponent, on our way to the semi-finals. So this will be interesting to watch. Any team here has an equal chance of making it to the last 4.
All right, exciting times indeed for African football. Sadiq Shaban joining us there from the coastal city of Egypt in the Suez. Well, from football, we cross over to tennis, where Rafael Nadal has moved into the Wimbledon semi-final after beating Sam Querrey with straight sets of 7-5, 6-2 and 6-2. The Spaniard made